Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, well, so in today's episode, I thought I'd try to say a few words about the 1999 film Fight Club, directed by David Fincher. A cult classic which stars Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, and Helena Bonham Carter. And first, for those of you who haven't seen it, here's a quick description of the film. It's about Jack, played by Norton, a depressed man suffering from insomnia, who meets a strange soap salesman, Tyler Durden, played by Pitt. Jack soon finds himself living in Tyler's squalid house after his own perfect apartment is destroyed. The two bored men go on to form an underground fight club with strict rules where they fight other men who are fed up with their own mundane domestic lives and who feel cocooned within society. Okay, well, because there are just a few specific themes I want to try to address, I'm going to just sort of jump right into the middle of the film. So at one point, Tyler says this to Jack. He says, "Listen to me. You have to consider the possibility that God doesn't like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. But this is not the worst thing that can happen." Okay, now it seems that Tyler doesn't think it's the worst thing that can happen because he thinks that if Jack really internalizes this, it'll bring him much more freedom than ever before. In other words, what seems like something terrible and destructive, like being unanchored from God or losing a father figure, is really not a bad thing at all, but actually an opportunity for a much more authentic and impassioned and creative life. Now, I think it's really hard not to see in this resonances of Nietzsche's famous madman episode from his book, The Gay Science. So if you don't know, in The Gay Science, Nietzsche, through the mouth of a madman, warns a crowd of people that God is dead. Now, it's pretty clear what Nietzsche means by the death of God. What he means by the death of God is that our reliance on religion as a moral compass and as a source of meaning is just no longer tenable. In other words, it's the recognition of a world that has no purpose. A world where there are no transcendent values to guide us and to give us meaning. Now, this is a heavy stuff, right? I mean, what's our reaction to it going to be? Well, most of us, Nietzsche thinks, just won't be able to handle it. We can't deal with the consequences of this collapse or loss. And so, what do? Well, we'll find a way to fill the void in all sorts of dubious ways. That is, we'll look for God substitutes, something to fill that God-shaped hole. Actually, even though it predates his meeting with Tyler, Jack has, in effect, been filling just that hole all his life, since he's basically made money and consumption his savior and idol. I mean, remember his memorable lines at the beginning of the film, like this one. "Like everyone else, I had become a slave to the IKEA nesting instinct." And then this great line. "I flipped through catalogs and I wondered what kind of dining set defines me as a person." In other words, Jack's treatment for the affliction of meaninglessness has been consumerism and conformism. In this way, he's been very much like the people in the town that Nietzsche's madman visits, who are living in the wake of the death of God, although they just don't realize it. Anyway, I think that Tyler does actually wake Jack up to this, though, and gets him to see that this is a great opportunity for real freedom and creativity, for self-created meaning, and so for a more authentic life. And Jack, by getting involved in Fight Club, at least to an extent, does this. By deciding not to die without some battle scars, and by getting in touch with his more primal self, Jack does make some headway out of conformist society and, as Nietzsche might say, into those open seas that every free spirit wants to explore. Okay, well, I mentioned just now that Jack strives for more authenticity in his life, but just how authentic does he really turn out to be in the end? That's the question. I mean, although I did say that Jack, by getting involved in Fight Club, was starting to live a little more authentically, especially given the kind of person he used to be, it turns out that, well, that may be too quick a judgment. Actually, I think you could argue that what happens is that Jack actually lapses back into full conformity. I mean, think about it. Tyler calls for the men to own up and to self-define, but he gradually becomes a cult leader who strips them all of their identity. Once considered the solution to conformity, it turns out that Tyler is actually the problem. In other words, Jack and the others, they become Tyler's pawns. They become the space monkeys they so disdain. Now, this is the problem with authenticity. We each need to become authentic in our own particular way, but we don't become authentic by mimicking someone else who seems to be authentic and some kind of leader. As Nietzsche's Zarathustra warns us, one repays a teacher badly if one always remains nothing but a pupil, which is why he encouraged his followers to constantly doubt and reject him. I mean, as the saying goes, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him, right? Anyway, it's true that Jack has rejected consumerism and all the conformity that goes along with that, and that's a start. But at the end of the day, he hasn't discovered his own replacement for what he's thrown out. Yes, he was able to make the all-important step of destroying, but he failed to create something new, to build a new foundation. Project Mayhem destroys without creating. In this sense, Jack actually fails to live up to Nietzsche's call. By conforming and by not being able to be constructive, he lapses into nihilism, the very thing he thought he was overcoming when he left society to join Fight Club in the first place. You see, for Nietzsche, nihilism was, well, simply the biggest problem to be overcome. We must create something unique to put in the place of God. Now, Fight Club shows us just how hard that actually is. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, the psychologist Erich Fromm might be kind of helpful here, especially when it comes down to further analyzing both Jack and Tyler. You see, what Fromm talks quite a bit about is both the masochist and the sadist. And like I said, it might be relevant here. So Fromm describes the masochist as a frightened individual who seeks for somebody or something to tie themselves to. They just can't bear to be an individual. They want to eliminate the burden of the self, he says. And most importantly, they fear freedom and they want to get rid of it altogether. And so what does the masochist do? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? What they do is they submit to a person or a power that is overwhelmingly stronger, and so they annihilate themselves and they forsake their freedom. So one manifestation of this might be for the masochist to submerge themselves in something larger than them. Like I said, a powerful person, but it could also be a group or an institution or a nation. Okay, but to go back to Jack and his ultimate conformism, this is pretty much what he does, doesn't he? That's to say, instead of trying to figure out who he really is, and instead of exploiting the newfound freedom he discovered, He conforms to a cult leader and its dictates. He surrenders his individuality and his freedom, and he dissolves himself in this outside power. Okay. Well, now on the other hand, we have the sadist. So the sadist, Fromm says, is someone who needs to have complete mastery over another person to become their god, essentially. Now, this might seem very different from the masochist, right? But actually, it's only so in appearance. And that's because deep down, both the masochist and the sadist suffer from the same basic problem or need, namely the inability to withstand the isolation and the weakness of their own self. The sadist, in other words, needs his object just as much as the masochist needs his. They're both radically dependent on another. Well, so something like this might describe Tyler, right? I mean, Tyler breaks down the men's egos in a kind of military way. You're no unique snowflake, he tells them. He yells at them. He plays their god. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, he needs them just as much as they need him. So ultimately, both Jack and Tyler then suffer from the same problem. They both lack any real authenticity, and they've both forsaken their freedom. You know, at the end of the day, I think that what Fight Club does is it reminds us to pay attention to and to be aware of one of the greatest temptations. And it's this: the temptation to try to escape our freedom when it gets difficult to bear. After all, there is in us, it seems, an instinctive wish for submission, isn't there? I mean, how else do we explain, for example, the political landscape today, where millions and millions seem to be readily capitulating to overt authority figures and autocrats? But just remember this, that what we might gain in security and relief from doubt, we more than lose in something much more important, namely our freedom and our integrity. Bye for now.